Welcome to Leaders of Global Bharat. I am Rakesh Khar. We have with us someone today who actually doesn't need any introduction. He's someone who authored The Incredible India Story and is now driving the G20 presidency for India. He's neither tired nor retired. And he has done it all, seen it all. Of course, the G20 presidency is a huge challenge. Welcome, Mr. Amitabh Kant, to Leaders of Global Bharat. Thank you for sparing time with your current responsibility. It's a huge, huge challenge.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Our focus today in this conversation is going to be on the economic imperatives of G20. It's a new idea for India. Congratulations to India, first of all, for assuming the presidency, with you being the G20 Sherpa. It has set off huge expectations, and for an average Indian, he's trying to decode what is it. The logo is very impressive, but what does it mean for him? So it's time, actually, to my mind, to look back and see what has G20 achieved over the last few years. So as someone who is driving it now in India, what is a dispassionate view? How do you look at the success rate of G20 so far?
Yeah. So G20 is one body which comprises of both the developed and the developing world.
Right, sir.
It comprises of 85% of the global GDP. It comprises about 78% of the global trade, 90% of the patents. It accounts for almost 70% of the total population. Now G20 is important because it's a compact body of developed and developing world. It's not like the United Nations, which has 186 members, not able to arrive at conclusions, or like G7, which is comprising of only the developed world.
Absolutely.
So there are several.
Is that an opportunity or that a challenge? Because there are two disparate set of economic entities.
Yeah, but when the world can move forward, when there is a shared vision of both the developed and the developing world. And it's important that the developing world, where many challenges arise today, like an unvaccinated person in one part of the world is a challenge for everybody else in other parts of the world.
Absolutely.
And similarly, poverty in one part of the world is a challenge for citizens in another part of the world. Therefore, it's very important that developed and developing countries work together. In the past, when major crises have arisen in developing countries, because of which the Mexican peso crisis, East Asian crisis, the Russian ruble crisis, all these challenges were sorted out by the G20. So G20 has played a very critical, a very major and a very significant role in the past, including on sustainable debt initiative for the developing countries of the world. And it's very, very important forum, to my mind, at a moment when there are several challenges confronting the world. The world is confronted by slow growth. There is huge pressure of inflation. The world is challenged by the post-COVID era, where close to about 200 crore people, 200 million people have gone below the poverty line. 100 million have lost their jobs. There's a challenge of climate action and climate finance. There's a challenge of global supply chains being disrupted. And there is a huge, huge challenge of ensuring that several countries in the world which are suffering from global debt do not suffer the consequences of this, but are able to grow. Because if global debt impacts several countries, then the world will really have a huge implication.
Quite right. You listed the challenges that face India in its presidency. So what are the measurable outcomes that you have in mind? I mean, in terms of a wish list?
So
we are right now in a situation which is very, the unknowns are not known at all. And every day there's a fresh unknown coming. There is geopolitical strife, there is geoeconomic stress, then there is COVID, then there is economic recession. So on a very realistic scale, what would be the outcomes that you are, quite to say, imagining at the end of India's presidency?
So every challenge is an opportunity, and it's an opportunity for all the leaders of the world. So the Prime Minister has talked about this, that irrespective of the geopolitical tensions, we have to look at a human-centric growth. We have to look at oneness of all humankind. And therefore, to my mind, the challenges before the G20 are one of inclusive, resilient and sustainable growth. There's a challenge of doing sustainable development goals, particularly education and health. There is a challenge of digital transformation of the world, which the Prime Minister talked about at Bali, that there's a unique model which India has built up in terms of digital
so I was
public
coming
influence.
to that, in terms of the digital stack or the India stack as it is popularly called now. How do you see India transporting their template to the developing economies, especially where I think there is huge room to, so to say, replicate the model? You see that would be a key agenda in terms of India delivering that plus for the G20.
So India has done some unique things. It's built up the digital identity, it's ensured bank accounts, it's brought in the digital empowerment protection architecture. It has driven the CoWIN app. It has ensured fast payments, which are 7x of what US, Europe, Germany, France, Canada do together. It is 3x of what China does. And therefore, this is a very unique model of building railway tracks.
That's right.
On the top of which private sector can innovate. So India is the only country where PhonePe and Google Pay compete, WhatsApp and Paytm compete. And because innovation is taking place by the private sector on top of the railway track, there's a huge new model. Same thing we did with CoWIN, and same thing we've done with bank accounts.
There is appetite, you think, and demand from these countries which are not as developed to look at this model and adopt it?
So there is a huge, not merely demand, but this is the way to go forward for the world. There is the big tech model of the USA, there's the GDPR model of Europe. But to our mind, this is the model to go forward if you want to transform. Because this is open source, this is open API, this is interoperable, this is low cost at scale.
And it has given results.
And it has been transformational in India.
That's right.
And because it's being transformational, the lessons learned from here of size and scale can then be implemented. So in the world today, there are close to about 400 crore people without a digital identity.
Oh,
there are 200 crore people without a bank account. There are 133 countries without a digital payment mechanism. So unless and until you don't do this in many countries, they will not be able to accelerate the pace of growth. So if you want to lift people above poverty line, this is the way forward.
Yeah, so obviously this is a big outcome that could likely happen at the end of India's presidency. Coming to energy crisis, energy transition is also a huge challenge. It's linked in many ways to economics, it's linked to climate. So, there is, because of the ongoing war, a lot of stress on that. How do we reconcile the contradictions, which are quite apparent?
I don't see this as a contradiction. I don't see this as a challenge. I see this as a huge opportunity. Countries and companies will not grow rapidly. They will not become wealthier unless and until they don't go digital, they don't go green. The challenge is that the countries and companies which are able to accelerate the pace of going green will be able to attract valuation, they'll be able to attract capital. And therefore, India must disrupt. India must accelerate the pace of going green. The world must accelerate the pace of going green. There are new technologies. India has done a lot.
Would you call India buying, unprecedented supplies from Russia also a disruption, part of the disruption?
Well, I would say India doing renewables 9 years ahead of its NDC targets as being very
That's one aspect of it, indeed.
And India doing green hydrogen is very, to size and scale, and becoming the lowest cost producer in the world will be disruptionist.
I was also coming to the fact that, a lot of these Western countries are trying to, so to say, put and present India as a villain when it comes to relationship with Russia via the fuel imports that we're doing. So of course, we are saying what is right for us is that's what we'll do. But do you see that becoming a tension point in G20 going forward?
I think America and Europe understand India's position. We have a very vast population to feed. We have to take care of 1.4 billion people. We are very import dependent as far as energy is concerned, and therefore we need to buy. We need to buy from wherever we get at the lowest cost. Germany and Europe have been buying from Russia all these years. They still continue to buy. You can't say that we'll not buy oil. They will continue to buy gas. That's not a feasible proposition.
It's not fair also.
Yeah. So I think India is doing the right thing. It needs to take care of its population. It needs to take care of its citizens. It needs to buy at the lowest cost. It's buying, and the geopolitics in this subcontinent are very different from the geopolitics of Europe.
That brings me to the question, post-COVID, the entire economic global order has got, so to say, disrupted. I don't know, the jury is out whether it's good, bad or not. The point about, increased economic nationalism versus globalization, do you see that casting its shadow, rightly or wrongly, on the G20 economic agenda?
No, I don't. People in the G20 clearly realize that if you need to accelerate the pace of growth, if you need to lift people above poverty line, two things must happen. One is greater level of globalization. Secondly, you need freer flow of trade. And thirdly, you need to demonopolize global supply chains, and therefore you need to build production linkages in many other countries of the world.
Disruption of supply chains, you talked about that earlier also. Sustaining them, streamlining them, and then making them to India's benefit, with China being, so to say, under cloud and unlikely recovering so soon. You see that panning to India's advantage, and would G20 work in that direction?
No, I wouldn't say that we need worry about China. We need to make ourselves very competitive. It's an internal process of making yourself simple, easy, the lowest cost producer in sunrise sectors of growth. I am a great believer that the kind of reforms that have been carried out in India in terms of GST, in terms of IBC, in terms of RERA, in terms of simplicity of business will stand India in good stead in the years to come. And therefore, we should continue to drive the process of reforms. We should continue to ensure that each state of India becomes very easy and simple. They must become the manufacturing destinations of the world. You need about 12 to 13 states as champions of the world. If they become the champions of the world, if they grow at 9 to 10% per annum, India will grow at those high rates. There is a need for manufacturing, there is a need for urbanization, there is a need for a huge shift towards sunrise areas of growth, of electric mobility, of solar, of battery, advanced chemistry cell battery, many other areas, which is very critical for India's growth story.
That brings me to the macro question. Do you see G20 presidency and the entire attention and the spotlight that the Prime Minister himself is doing with you, driving it on a day-to-day basis, will give a push for more reforms? We have the land acquisition pending. We have quite a few. We have labor reforms pending. Do you see some direction in that?
No, I think the government of India has done a lot of reforms.
But some are pending as
well. So there are three things which the G20 can definitely do. One is that it can help 56 cities where different events are going to be held to become top-class cities. If states focus on improving the quality of infrastructure, drainage, sewage, solid waste, transport network, everything. That's what the Prime Minister has requested all the chief ministers to do. Secondly, the states can become great cultural destinations. Thirdly, the states can use this opportunity to push their handicraft through the one district, one product. And fourthly, the states can all become great drivers of their cuisine and establish their own cultural entity and their own state brand in the international markets. This is an opportunity for every state, every union territory. It is actually cooperative federalism at its best.
Interesting, and I see the push that the Prime Minister has been doing, and states that you've gone to Rajasthan, which is an opposition ruled state, and I did see that there was enormous support.
Oh, Rajasthan did a great job, let me be honest about it. They cleaned up the roads, they did excellent branding, they brought the best cultural show, they cleaned up the lake.
Even Mumbai was looking much better.
Oh, no, Mumbai did fantastic job.
Good. So that's interesting. Let me now look at, how do you see India configuring the global financial system to, so to say, reimagine the emerging bloc? Do you see a role there?
Yeah, very critical role. See, the financial system, the architecture of it was drawn in the post-World War II Bretton Woods period.
That's right.
And that is outdated, that is outmoded. Most of these institutions which were drawn up, IMF, World Bank, all do direct lending. Today there's a need for the world to do more of blended finance, first loss guarantees, credit enhancement, which will enable you to do 10x more lending.
But wouldn't there be resistance from the existing or the established pack or the order?
No, the American US Treasury has said this exactly the same thing and asked the World Bank to rework its mandate in favor of doing more of credit enhancement. So if you are able to do this, then you will do 15x more lending to the world. There's a need for institutions which will do climate financing.
Yeah.
There's a need for institutions which will do financing for sustainable development goals. That's the vacuum in the world. That's what these institutions must fulfill.
Another sore point for India, in fact, we are a victim of terror, and this terror funding, the maze and the vicious cycle keeps on changing its order to hurt countries like India. Is that on the agenda? I did see that.
Well, there are political issues which are discussed in the foreign ministers' meeting. So other than the Sherpa track and the finance track, political issues are discussed in the finance minister's agenda, and I'm quite sure that this will be one of the issues to be discussed.
But separately as an economic imperative, terror, economics?
No, that comes in. The recommendations of that will come in and finally go to the leaders.
Okay, interesting. You did talk about the political plus and the federal India story, but in terms of the industry, you see a spin-off in terms of economic growth or a boost through G20 for the next 1 year, and which are the sectors which you think are likely? I mean, tourism obviously is an obvious case. Which are the other sectors?
No, I think there's an opportunity for every single sector. This is an opportunity to drive growth. This is an opportunity to carry reform. This is an opportunity for industry to really push for greater manufacturing. There's an opportunity to attract companies which have not invested in India. There's an opportunity to attract the best of the companies into India. And this is also an opportunity to push consumer demand in a very big way. So this is a huge, huge opportunity. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to drive growth.
Good, interesting. I think the messaging needs to be, we have had the Prime Minister talk about, the ministers are talking about it, you've been talking about it. But a larger drive down for an average Indian in terms of the full import, what we're discussing on the economic front, on the political front of G20 may be mandated. And
No, the Prime Minister has said that this has to be a citizens G20. And therefore you will see a lot of activities of Jan Bhagidari. We've had outreach to the universities, to the students. We've involved every single citizen. We will continue to do this unabated.
Lastly, on the economic imperatives, there's this G20, now there's B20. There's a responsibility and I think an opportunity for the top business, India Inc., Tata Sons chairman, Mr. Chandrasekaran has been given the mandate to, so to say, develop that B20 agenda. What exactly is the requirement and what do you think, do you think it will pan out?
So, the G20 also has 11 engagement groups. You have a group for civil society, Think 20, there's a group of Startup 20 which India started, there's a Business 20 which plays a very key role. The objective of Business 20 is really to drive the key business agenda. So this is an opportunity for them really to push for reforms, to push for what is required globally for businesses to grow. Governments, after all, are just policy makers. It's the private sector which has to drive growth.
I mean, that's what the finance minister has been repeatedly saying.
What she's saying is absolutely right.
That so you think that would, G20 would act as a trigger to unleash the animal instinct?
It's a huge, huge opportunity, as said, to drive consumerism, investment and growth. And this is an opportunity for India to drive growth for the next 3 decades.
Thank you, Mr. Amitabh Kant. It's a pleasure always talking to you. And, what you said about G20 being mainstreamed in the national conscience, I think it's a hugely important agenda for the country for the next 1 year.
Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
Thanks
Great pleasure.